I need to make a Davion force for IllClan Era in order to participate in my group's upcoming campaign, and my force manual Davion doesn't tell me how. So we'll have to do it ourselves. If you are also new to IllClan Era or force building, follow along. Maybe you'll pick up some tips that will help you out on your own journey. To achieve this, we'll have to break down what's allowed in the IllClan Era. Then we'll find out how to leverage the tools that the force manual does give you, and turn your collection into a force worthy of stomping on to the latest battlefields in the Battletech universe. So why am I making a Davion force for IllClan Era? I want to participate with my opponent in a massive new campaign similar to my earlier Polaris campaign, but this time set in the border war between the Davions and the Curitans, as seen in Dominions Divided. It was my first sourcebook of the IllClan Era, and I am utterly hooked. But I have to have the force done in the coming few weeks, and that includes painting, since we plan to start the campaign over the holiday break. My opponent is going to make a Curitan battalion, and I want to one-up him. I want to make an entire regiment, or at least a regimental combat team, consisting of multiple battalions of mechs, armor, and infantry. I've always had bigger eyes than my stomach. So I thought the force manual would be the perfect place to start. It tells us all we need to know about creating a Davion force, right? Right? I know I talk like I know what I'm doing, but my patrons can definitely confirm that I don't. I'm essentially a beginner to this way of doing Battletech, a way my friends and I jokingly call future history battles. Coming from other games where you get kicked in the kidneys if you do it the wrong way, I wanted to make sure I was doing it the right way. Imagine my disappointment when I got my shiny new force manual in the mail, cracked it open, and, well, shoot. This is for late succession wars through the clan invasion. In the availability and force creation sections, it details different technology grades and rarity factors for different battle mechs of those eras, but nothing relating to IllClan. It does tell you how to create a force, however, which seem to follow similar steps to the Alpha Strike force creation steps. So what is this IllClan Era anyway? Why does it matter? IllClan Era is the cutting edge of fiction being produced by the big brains over at Catalyst Game Labs, the stewards of the Battletech lore, covering what might be considered recent events in this game of future history. The problem with making an IllClan Era list is, well, most of the setting blew up. Figuratively and a little bit literally. Without turning this into a whole History Channel documentary, the short of it is that a holy war broke out in the setting. Everybody fought everybody, some planets got nuked, and then some new guys showed up and banded together with many of the great houses to fight the big bad guys, while siphoning off worlds around Mother Terra to make a new Roman Republic, which then later died when most of the common form of interstellar communication got cut off mysteriously. During this Republic era, many programs incentivized the mechs into plowshares type of disarmament, idyllically setting the stage for a peaceful tomorrow. Of course, that didn't work, but it did cull a vast number of older mech designs from the setting, requiring new and refurbished ones to be tossed into the mix. New technologies developed as well, meaning a greater variety of war machines came into being. Most importantly, it meant that a lot of classic mech designs and variants went extinct, meaning some research would be required to find the newer versions of those chassis. That brings you up to speed and illustrates why this force manual, only including the eras of the late succession wars up to the clan invasion, presented me with something of a roadblock. This would require a little bit more digging. Going back to Dominions Divided, I looked in the back, where they detail running a campaign set on this stage. Sure enough, it doesn't have anything concrete on how to make a force for the IllClan Era. But it does include some rats. That's random assignment tables, not the rodent. These are, well, worthless to me. Some people use them, and more power to them. I can't really do much with them, however. I was hoping to find the availability scores similar to how Force Manual Davion lists them. I asked around the Catalyst Discord and found that there are plans for a PDF update or a supplement that has these eras, but no date was given on its release. I need to show up this Draconis bastard now, though, so that doesn't really help me. We plan on launching the new campaign around the holiday break. The Force Manual does give you something useful, however. Looking through the force building section again, I noticed a few new formations. Neat. You get 2 general use formations and 1 specifically for Davion forces. Guess we're going with the MUL and doing it live. I can toe the line. I can do it both the right way and the wrong way. What I've decided to do is similar to my other video where I use the MUL and find out what variants match the chassis I have. Then, bit by bit, I'm going to assemble each company from the mechs I have in my plastic collection. I'm going to structure the unit based on some guidelines from the Force Manual, namely this table detailing the structure. So let's go through this step by step. Step 1. Select a battle value or points value. We're going to do some quick math and try and come to a points value. IllClan Era mechs can cost a little bit more than earlier eras due to the firepower and technology available, so we're going to aim a bit higher than normal. Most game groups I know stick to 350 to 400 points value for a single Alpha Strike battle, aiming to represent roughly a company versus another company. Since we are putting together the entire regiment, we'll just multiply the points value to try and accommodate, adding up the number of companies we have in the force, 3 per battalion, 3 battalions per regiment, plus the command lances. I come out to about 10 companies worth. We'll call it an even 5,000 points value for the regiment, which should give us plenty of wiggle room for adding extra stuff, and should make for about 500 points value per company. Step 2. Choose an era. Easy, we already did this. We're going for IllClan Era. Step 3. Choose a faction. We are making a Davion-aligned force that isn't a mercenary or a pirate. Again, an easy choice for us. Step 4. Choose a combat command. This might be one of the most overlooked steps when making a force, as most people usually just make their own, or forego it entirely. Listed in the Force Manual are lots of pre-existing commands, including some famous ones, like the Deneb Light Cavalry, or the Avalon Hussars. I've elected to do the Crucis Lancers, but the specific regiment is where I first got stuck. I don't want to crush any existing lore with my custom force, and I probably don't have the correct models to accurately depict a regiment with a well-documented history like the Crucis Lancers. That being said, we can fudge it a bit and still land somewhere in the ballpark. Take a gander at this. This is the info relevant to the 5th Crucis Lancers during the late Succession Wars and into the clan invasion era. It tells us approximately what skill rankings the overall average should come out to, as well as how well equipped this command was. It tells us a rough composition of its core elements, which can give us an idea on how to structure our own command. Lastly, it details some special command abilities. But we are going to toss those right out the window because we are choosing the sub-option listed in the Choose a Combat Command section. Unlisted Davion forces. This means we're going to have to roll on those special command abilities randomly later on. Let's hope that we get some good ones. I'm going with the 9th Crucis Lancers. We're going to bastardize it by coming up with some far-fetched reason why it's being reconstituted in the year of our Lord 3151. Sarna.net is a priceless resource for this, as it can help you find the specific publication that has the lore you are trying to shoehorn your command into. And sometimes it even summarizes it for you all in one place. In this case, Sarna doesn't have the information for the Crucis Lancers in IllClan Era, as Dominions Divided hasn't been added yet. Furthermore, Dominions Divided seems to be missing some info, and we only have a select few commands fleshed out in a useful way. We'll be stealing some cues from the 8th Crucis Lancers, and also will inventory the collection we have to see what fits. So we are going for a regiment. Since it is still in the process of being reformed from the elements of other AFFS assets, I decided to go with an understrength regiment. Since I only have enough mechs for about 2 battalions, and a regiment usually has 3 battalions, I'm just going to leave one open for future reinforcements. For the moment, we'll start on the first 2 battalions. I will try and earmark an amount of points value to that battalion though, probably around 1500 points value. We are going to zoom in and use the company record sheets to start figuring out what units to use and what formations they'll belong to. Now, this can easily spiral out of control, so I had a talk with my campaign opponent and we agreed to a few rules. We both are going to make a full regiment. He might just have to reuse mechs, and he won't be able to field more than a battalion at any given time, which is, big enough for me, really. At least 75% of the units in our command we are making must belong to our faction's availability, as shown in the MUL. This lets us use some of our other mechs to round out the numbers, as well as explains things like hereditary mechs, battlefield salvage, etc. Units not normally available to our particular faction must not be extinct in the IllClan era. This helps just keep it so that we aren't running things that just plain don't exist in the setting at the time. We also can pull from the mercenary faction lists as a secondary faction. We must use as many unique formations as possible before taking duplicates, with support formations being the exception. This gives us some flexibility without allowing a lot of spam formations, and forces us to carefully choose the formations we want to include rather than just taking whichever one we think will result in the most wanton destruction. Since we don't have rarity statistics for IllClan Era yet, my opponent and I decided to limit our repetition to max 2 of the same chassis per battalion. We double that for conventional vehicles. This should keep it from getting too spammy, but doesn't prevent us from running common chassis in good amounts per regiment. We ignore the equipment ratings optional rules, as this would just complicate the process a little bit too much for us. There may be more rules that crop up, but this works for us in the moment and allows us to get going to the next step. Make a formation for the company. This step is deceptively long because it is the one you will have to repeat the most number of times to make a force at this size. I'm going to break this down into chunks. I organize my collection of miniatures into size categories. If I were a really smart cookie, I would just look up all the mech designs ahead of time and find the variants that work for IllClan Era on the master unit list, and even perhaps sort them by battlefield role. I am not a smart cookie though, so I sort them into size categories only. This does still speed up some of the formation building process. I print off a bunch of copies of the company record sheet. You could probably be a smart cookie and use a spreadsheet, maybe even one like my mercenary helper sheet that I used before. For me, it snowed here, and the power went out several times. So I didn't want to be possibly interrupted in this process by further inconveniences, and I just printed out a bunch of these company record sheets and got to work. I start with the command company, the 3 command lances needed for my regimental HQ and the 2 battalions I have on hand. Going through the force manual, you notice they describe a number of lance formations. We should know this process by now, as I have made several videos focusing on putting together a particular formation. So I pick a formation, of course the command lance to start with, and put my favorite commander mechs in there, matching them to the requirements of the formation. I pick the Sagittaire, the Marauder II, the Cyclops C, and the Orion. I find variants that match the availability for the IllClan Era in the same way I did in a prior video, marshalling your forces. When filling out this sheet, if you are using Alpha Strike, just use shorthand for things. I make up a quick code name for the lance, I say what kind of lance it is, and I start filling out the information for the variant I selected for the chassis. Since we don't have availability information yet, I use this part to simply indicate if it is available for my faction in this era with a check mark. You might have another way of doing this, but I kept it moving as I got a lot to do. With the command lance done, then I move on to a new type of formation, the Hunter Lance, which will serve as the HQ lance for my 1st battalion. I want the majority of my biggest bruisers to occupy this, and so on, and so on. Soon I have my entire 1st company done. I keep going. I start on the 2nd company. This time the actual 1st line company of the 1st battalion. I follow all the same steps to put together, building it formation by formation. Now that I have the entire 1st battalion done, it's like building Legos. At this stage, I'm not worried about points value, skill ratings, that could come later. This is the most time-intensive step for a force of this size due to the number of reps you need to get in. But you start to speed up as you get used to the process. If you don't use miniatures, you could probably make this step even faster by using random assignment tables or force generators. But doing it this way allows me to use only what's in my collection. When we are done with this step, we have a good basis to work from. Add up the points value. See where you fall. Are you on target, or do you need to make adjustments? That is what the next step is all about. Select skills and modify the points value of the units. If you selected a specific command with a particular experience rating, you need your average to fall within this range in order to emulate. For me, I'm just going to make shit up as I go along. I added up my 2 battalions that I have so far, plus the regimental HQ, and got 3,313 points value. That leaves me around 1600 points left to create another battalion and to bump up the skills for the units I've already selected. My goal for this command is for it to be pulled together from a number of units already in service, with solid regulars siphoned off into the unit to give them a strong start. So I start improving skills and purchasing special pilot abilities for my HQ lances, but I leave the rest of the units alone for the moment, just assigning them a regular experience level. Whatever points value is left over, I bank it for another battalion to start working on. I envision that the 3rd battalion is a work in progress in the setting, and the unit is still being reformed. In the future, that means they will receive green ratings. With that done, we can now move on to the next step: assigning special pilot abilities. This part is pretty easy, as only one unit per company can get them. The number of special pilot abilities is determined by the unit's skill, so I just go about giving specials until I've spent enough points and rounded out some PV. The list of these special pilot abilities and their points values costs are covered in the Alpha Strike Commander's Edition. I also use this step to decide which units will be the officers of my formations, creating a chain of command that reaches up to the regimental level. Pages 22 to 23 of the Force Manual are great for determining what ranks your pilots would have and what size force that rank would normally command. Although this is primarily catering to the Succession Wars or the Clan Invasion eras, I still found it useful, especially since the sidebars give you both the original rank titles before the Steiner-Davion merger of the period, and the AFFC ranks during the Federated Commonwealth's reign. Remember that you need these guys alive to make use of the special command abilities that are coming later, and in some cases to pass orders on, for you strategic operations or battle force enjoyers. So I pick some of my more durable units rather than just the ones with the biggest damage. Moving on, we get to the real juicy bit: assign special command abilities. These abilities are what form the core of your command. They are the doctrine by which your command conducts themselves in battle, and can really change up your playstyle, which is great if you selected a command that already has them assigned and you know what they are going to be before you build your force. For me, since I am just making some new tomfoolery from scratch, I have to randomly roll it. Let's hope I get a good one. Before I do that, I have to determine what level of experience my formation has to see how many special command abilities I can have. Since I left most of the pilot skills unchanged, I already know it will be regular, but if you have some different scores, you can get this by adding up all of the skills of all of the pilots and dividing that sum by the number of pilots you have. At least as far as Davion forces go, all commands created get one free special command ability. Being of regular experience, I get one extra one on the top. So let's roll those and see what I get. Did you know Google has a dice roller? The results are a 9 and a 10. My special command abilities end up being Environmental Specialists and Forcing the Initiative. Let's roll a second time to see what environment I get specialized in. We get a 1, which ends up being the woods, according to that table. Awesome, that sounds pretty useful, actually. We can even use this to help come up with our command's backstory, saying that they did all their training in a remote forest facility or something. What I might have done instead is just straight up emulated another regimental combat team, taking their command abilities, average experience, etc. But I wanted to do things by the book for this part and randomly roll them. More exciting that way, don't you think? Now, with all the paperwork completed, I separate the miniatures out, and then I realize, now I have to paint them. Thank you to my Patreon supporters for putting up with my shenanigans. Here they are, those beautiful people. If you want to help me make more videos like these, patrons are very appreciated, but even liking, subscribing, or sharing the videos to your mates is a great way to help me out. Just being here was a big help already, so thank you if you made it this far. Looks like my battle will continue.